Hey, everybody. My name is Carrie Lukas, and I'm president of Independent Women's Forum. Independent Women's Forum is the leading national women's organization dedicated to developing and advancing policies that aren't just well-intended, but that actually enhance people's freedom, opportunities, and well-being. And I'm tremendously honored. Today, we're going to be joined by Senator Marsha Blackburn of the great state of Tennessee. She's a little bit delayed. She was on the floor of the House giving a speech, and she's going to be joining us any minute. But I thought I'd pop on and introduce myself and tell you a little bit about what the senator and I are going to be talking about. I was very honored. I got to write an op-ed with her, and it was titled, "Why Are We Making Women's Lives More Difficult?" And that appeared in Newsweek. Yep, you can see the headline right there. And it was a really interesting piece to write because there's a whole lot to cover, and that's the senator and I have a lot of issues I'm hoping we can touch on today. And I'm really glad we're doing it today because you might be hearing, if you're on the internet and looking around and following politics, today is what some people call Equal Pay Day. Equal Pay Day is a holiday that was invented by the feminist left to try to create this idea that women, today is supposedly the day that after working for 3 months or whatever we've been working so far in 2021, we finally made up for last year's wage gap. And it's really to raise awareness and dramatize the idea that women are still paid less for men for equal work. And it would be a tremendously kind of sad day if that was actually the case. But in fact, the good news is that that statistic and this entire notion of equal pay day is incredibly misleading. And it's unfortunate because a lot of folks out there who talk about equal pay day are using it to advance policies which would actually backfire. Instead of helping women earn more, they would basically try to standardize and really micromanage our compensation packages, the name of or under the guise of helping women earn more, but it would really restrict the kind of opportunities and employment options that women have. So just to tell you a little bit about Equal Pay Day, actually Independent Women's Forum's great staffer, Patrice Anhuka, who's leading our Center for Economic Opportunity, she testified today on this and had some really important insights because I bet that as everybody suspects, when you are really comparing or when you're comparing the average woman's wages to the average man's wages, you're really not comparing apples to apples. When people say, women earn 80 cents on the dollar, they make it sound as though those are two colleagues, one male, one female, doing the same jobs at the same place. But in fact, that's not what it's comparing at all. The wage gap data, which underlies the Equal Pay Day concept, is actually just the aggregate, like the raw data of every person, every man who is classified as a full-time worker, and compares it to the average wage of every woman who is classified as a full-time worker. And yes, women end up earn less money than men do on average. But again, this ignores things like occupation. The one that always kind of stands out to me is it even ignores the number of hours worked. It shouldn't surprise anybody. I see Senator Blackburn. It's so good of you to join us. Thank you so much for being on today.
Well, I'm delighted to join you, and thanks for having this today.
Absolutely. Well, I was just talking a little bit about the fact that it is technically Equal Pay Day today. I bet you've heard that concept, and I was explaining that one of the things that amazes me is when on how misleading that statistic is that it doesn't even account for the number of hours that someone works. And there's a lot of variation, even when people are classified as full-time workers. That doesn't mean we're all working the exact same hours. And actually, men end up working significantly longer. And that alone explains a great deal of the wage gap. Do you feel like that's a statistic that you're still hearing?
One of the things that I put my focus on, Carrie, is realizing that women have to work longer and harder in order to achieve. And when my daughter was growing up, I had a poster that I put in her closet. It was Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, and they were a delightful dance team back in the 1950s, 60s, 70s. And on this poster, it said, She took every step he took in high heels and backward. And to me, that is just a great way of kind of summing up how hard women have to work. And, you know, what we have to do is, there is a term that I use, and I wrote a book on it several years ago. It's life equity. It is taking stock of all your talents, your gifts, your God-given talents and gifts, your experiences with your hopes and dreams and desires, and looking at how you build that worth in yourself, and then how you use that worth to achieve the goals that you would like to achieve in your life. And it's important for everybody to know that, to be confident also in what they've accomplished in their life.
You know, that's really such an important perspective, and you're right that I think that it bothers me when we talk just about equal pay day as if everything can be measured in terms of dollars, when especially I feel like a lot of women out there know that the things that we're proudest of are often not the money we earn or the careers we build, but the contributions we make to our families and communities and all these other things. But I want to ask you a little bit about COVID. Because I do think that it's interesting that, I've always talked a lot about the idea that women should be able to choose if they want to stay home or if they want to pursue a life in the career or a career life, they want to prioritize work. But for a lot of women, COVID has hit them particularly hard and took a lot of choices away from us. Can you talk a little bit about the disproportionate effect that COVID has had on women?
Oh, I will be happy to do so. And I kind of chuckled when I heard that Vice President Harris and former President Bill Clinton were going to do a roundtable on COVID and women, how it had impacted them today. I think their roundtable was taking place at Howard University because, I think I bring a different perspective to this. I've always been very entrepreneurial in the way I approach the life. And when I've led organizations, what I've done is to look at how we utilize flex time and options that will allow people to adapt their working schedule to their lives and to their families. I think that is very important. Now, with COVID, what we saw was a quick push and movement to remote working. We saw that people that lived in areas without access to high-speed internet were hampered from being able to utilize this. We saw that individuals that lived in areas where teachers' unions refused to go back to the classroom. They had to leave the workforce and they had to stay home with those children. Now, interestingly enough, women are the ones that have been most adversely impacted by this. And when you look at the life of a career woman, you see more or less a circuitous route as they take time off to care for elderly relatives, or they take time off to have families or to care for those families. And they have a great diversity of experience. But what we saw with COVID was that many of these women were forced to leave the workforce through no fault of their own, simply because their children were not in school, the children were on remote learning. There was no one who could tutor those children during the day to be certain that they stayed in Zoom school and that they got their classes and their work done. So I talk with women every day who say, I am looking forward to getting back to a routine with work. In Tennessee, we've been less impacted by this than other states because our schools were back up and running. They found a way to get back into school last year. And then most of our schools, nearly every one of them, were back by August. And we have our schools doing in-person learning in Tennessee. And when you get children back in school, then parents can go back to work and life can return to a more normal pace.
I so appreciate that. And I knew that Tennessee was one of those standouts. I'm here in Virginia. I'm a mother of 5. I've got 3 of my kids just has started tiptoeing back into school this month. And it's just been, we are public school. I'm a public school family. And it's been so incredibly frustrating. And I hope that people around the country are paying attention to this, because this really has been a show of what happens when parents don't have leverage. Around the country, you had private schools almost entirely fought to stay open, or they had to close. They stayed open for just a little bit of time, and then quickly tried to open again. Where the public schools have absolutely refused to open their doors. So I really hope that this can be a push for school choice. Parents deserve more options, even if you don't have the means to pay for private school.
That's exactly right. And I think that the school choice issue is one of those that by the time we got to May of last year, parents were saying, you've got to be kidding me. You're not going to offer summer school. You're not going to offer athletic programs or enrichment programs. We're just shut down. And parents started searching for those alternatives. And this has driven the push for school choice. I have never seen such a push for school choice in my life, but people have just about had it with these teachers unions who have said, well, until you meet our demands, we are not going to go back to the classroom.
Absolutely. I do hope that this is one of the silver linings, is that I hope that this can be at the start of a new conversation about education, and really how we can make it more parent and child centered instead of being so much about a jobs program. I've hoped that we have good news coming up, that this is the return to normal, that some places are starting to open up more, different states are starting to reduce restrictions. But then I'm also a little worried when it comes to seeing what's happening at the southern border, and the potential, especially, I know that if you come by air, you have to have a COVID test and have to be able to quarantine and check all these boxes. But then we see on the southern border, people coming in, they're not tested. They could be bringing new variants of COVID. And I'm really concerned that this could set back that reopening process. Are you concerned about this? Is there anything that you feel that the public can do?
Well, yes. And I was at the border last weekend, and I have to tell you, it is astounding to me. You can come into the country through the southern border illegally and not have to have a COVID test, not have to prove that you've had a vaccine. But if you're going to fly in here, then there is a different approach. You do have to have that proof. Some schools require people that have come into the country, been out of the country, and come back. Those children have to quarantine for a period of time. Some companies require that, that you lay back a week just so that you're sure you don't have COVID. But the southern border is different, and it is a very tragic situation that is happening there. The way people are being put in these housing facilities, there are no distancing protocols. The hygiene protocols are of concern. The way children are being treated, the way children are being recycled. There's actually, the cartels are doing something called child recycling, and just detrimental to children. They're using children to try to get adults into the country. There again, no one having a COVID test. And then when they do come in the country, they're being pushed to communities all across the country.
It really is. It's one of those that I feel like a lot of Americans out there have to be just like banging their heads saying, how can we have such a absolute nonsensical, it's so frustrating for American citizens who are trying to come in from or visit their loved ones from, if they're overseas, that aren't able to come in, and then to see what's going on and the potential setback if we do continue this madness at the border, these unfair treatments. But, in thinking about some of the ways that we can kind of get the economy and get women back to work, and, I would hope that, I know that a lot of people have felt fortunate that even if they couldn't do their kind of traditional 9-to-5 jobs, that there are ways to get gig work, to get it work as an independent contractor, and to have those, jobs that keep your foot in the door. But unfortunately, this is also kind of on the on the docket in the Senate, something called the PRO Act, which would tremendously restrict the ability of people, particularly women, because women are the ones who tend to value flexibility, to have those kinds of flexible work options. This is another one where the interests of unions are being kind of put ahead of the interest of workers. What do you think that's going on there? And what do you think the prospects are? And what are your concerns about that approach?
Yes, the PRO Act is one of those pieces of legislation that is designed to allow the unions, to bolster the unions in their membership. And what they would like to do is begin to organize what they call micro unions, where they can go into a community of gig workers or people that contract out to a larger company, independent contractors, and organize them together in a union. We know that these situations many times don't work out, because what ends up happening, you have the person that is being put in this union, by the time they pay their fees to the union and meet their demands, they have less take-home money in their pocket. And once their rates have to go up to meet the union demands, then what do they have? They have less work. So a free market system where an individual can set their price, complete their project, and work directly with someone who wants to utilize their services is the way you have a more robust economy. And Carrie, it's so interesting to me as I look at what the Democrats are trying to do in socializing or straitjacketing this economy and saying we want everybody to have the exact same outcome, not we want everyone to have the exact same opportunity. What they forget, it is freedom, free people, and free markets that end up making a community's economy more robust. It allows an independent contractor or a sole proprietor to go in and negotiate with a company to fill a need in that company. Indeed, I have a lot of friends who have actually built their business because they had worked for a company, and then the company decided they wanted to outsource, and they thought, I can leave full-time employment and handle this work by outsourcing. You won't be responsible for benefits for me. It will allow me to have flexibility in my schedule to work with my children and their activities. And that person then becomes a contractor to the company instead of an employee, but they retain an excellent working relationship with that company and with the team, the leadership team at that company. But what the Democrats would do is to take that away, because they think everybody, whether you're an Uber driver or a maker, then there ought to be a union for you so that there can be an institutionalizing of your work, and you're going to have more government control, more bureaucratic control over your life and your work.
That's such an important framework for this. At Independent Women's Forum, we started collecting stories because one of the great things about our federalist system is we can see laws in action. And we know from what happened in California when they opposed AB 5, which has very similar restrictions as are being proposed in the PRO Act. We started collecting stories from the workers who are impacted from it. And, it was interesting because as, at Independent Women's Forum, I'm often thinking about women and the impact on stay-at-home moms or people who are trying to balance kids' responsibility. And that was a big part of the story. But that wasn't it. There were also people who are disabled, people who are older, like senior citizens who were working but couldn't handle the grind of a 9-to-5 job, people with their own health issues. There was, it was amazing. We had this great example of a man an older gentleman who works seasonally as Santa Claus. He was out of work last year because of AB 5, because they can't hire that guy as a full-time employee. It made no sense. So it robs us not only people of work, but also our communities of a lot of richness. It's not just the people who lose jobs, but it's communities who lose these vital workers. So I really hope that we can remember that and allow diversity in work.
Absolutely. And I've got to let that be the last statement. They're telling me that I've got to get to
Oh,
this
sure.
virtual town hall with one of my counties in Tennessee. And I've run a little bit long,
No
busy
worries.
days. But thank you so much for the leadership that you bring to IWF. And thank you for the leadership that you bring to these issues. It is always a pleasure to work with y'all. Thanks so much, Carrie. See ya.
Great. Thank you, Senator Blackburn. And thank you, everybody, for joining in. You'll please come visit us at IWF for more information about these and other issues. And thanks again for following us today.